While this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors, by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor. Many voices out there. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg speaking yesterday following the historic conviction of former President Donald Trump on all 34 counts in the criminal hush money trial. Trump becomes the first former U.S. president in American history to be convicted of a crime. The verdict was read just around 5 p.m. in a New York City courtroom after the 12 jurors deliberated for roughly 9.5 hours over 2 days. Each of the 34 felony counts is associated with a falsified business record pertaining to Trump's reimbursement of his former attorney and fixer Michael Cohen for a hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels during the 2016 presidential campaign to keep her quiet about a sexual encounter she says she had with Trump back in 2006. Trump has denied her claim. Sentencing is set for July 11th, just 4 days before the Republican National Convention begins in Milwaukee. The maximum sentence for falsification of business records is 4 years in prison, but incarceration is not a mandatory sentence. It will be Judge Juan Merchan who ultimately decides the punishment. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have the host of Way Too Early, White House Bureau Chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire, U.S. Special Correspondent for BBC News, Katty Kay, MSNBC contributor Mike Barnicle, former litigator and MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, former U.S. attorney and MSNBC contributor Chuck Rosenberg, and MSNBC legal analyst Danny Savalas. Good to have you all with us.
Chuck, I'm curious, your first impressions of what happened yesterday, what Americans should be looking at, what they should be focusing on as we move forward.
Yeah, it's going to be hard, I think, for our very divided country, Joe, to look at this the way I do. I mean, I think it's relatively simple. The government presented a compelling case. They adduced the facts they wanted to adduce. They called the witnesses they wanted to call. They asked them the questions they wanted to ask them. And the jury understood it. Juries often do. I mean, statistically speaking, most juries convict most of the time. And that's what happened here. But, you know, I was thinking about, believe it or not, a National Science Foundation poll, Joe, that shows that about a quarter of Americans, and this has been consistent over time, believe that the sun revolves around the earth. You know, for those of you keeping score at home, it doesn't. And so I think it's hard to convince people that what happened in New York happens routinely and regularly around the country. Juries hear the facts, they deliberate, they deliver their verdict, and we need to accept that, plain and simple.
So, Lisa Rubin, you've been covering this so closely down at the courthouse right from the beginning, giving us your analysis and sort of reading some tea leaves in the last few days. I think the prosecution hoped for, but probably didn't expect, a clean 34 for 34 sweep on every count to get convictions on those. What's your reaction to the verdict?
Willie, I was in the courtroom yesterday for the verdict, and I can tell you that just the very existence of a verdict was a huge shock to everyone there, given the fact that Judge Merchan assembled the parties at 4:15. He came in, he said that he was prepared to release the jurors at 4:30 and that he just needed to take care of a couple of things. And then he stepped off the bench, and 4:30 came and went. And at 4:36, there was just this tension all throughout the courtroom as everyone was waiting, thinking, what in the world is happening? Could we possibly have a verdict? And indeed, when he retook the bench and said, I have a note from the jury, they have a verdict, both people on both sides of me gasped audibly. You could just hear it reverberate throughout the crowd. So just the very existence of the verdict was shocking, but I think the reactions of the parties was also so telling. Former President Trump tried to put a good face on the verdict. When he walked out, you could see He set his jaw in that Trump-like way. He pursed his lips in the way we're all used to. He set his face to look ahead. And yet, he looked like a man defeated and resigned. He walked slowly and lumberingly. And then once they were out of the courtroom, we, the press corps, about 100 of us, were left in there with the DA's office. I don't know if I've shared this before, but when Trump moves out into the hallway, for security purposes, everyone is frozen. And that includes the staff of the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. If you were counting on them to look as if they just scored the biggest score in that office's history, you wouldn't have seen it on their faces or on Alvin Bragg's face. He looked straight ahead, and the prosecutors on his team didn't crack a single smile among them. Maybe there was a little twinge of relief in their shoulders and body language, but this was a group of people that knew that all eyes of the world would be on them in this moment if they were lucky enough to get a conviction, let alone 34 of them. And they met the moment with their seriousness of purpose. This is not a group of people, despite what Donald Trump and his Republican allies are saying, that relished this victory, that are rejoicing in it. It was a somber and sad day for America that we have now seen a former president convicted on 34 felony counts. And you could see that in all of their faces.
Gut punch to the country. Danny Ceballos, let's talk about what's next. Sentencing is July 11th. What happens between now and then, and what are the options with sentencing? And of course, I take it an appeal can't start until after that.
Yeah, probation will prepare what's called a pre-sentence investigation report. Now, that normally involves interviewing the offender to find out about the offender, but who honestly needs to interview Donald Trump to find out about his biographical details and all the other information that normally goes into a PSR. Then the sides will submit their sentencing memoranda. The Trump side will unquestionably ask for a probation-only sentence. The real question for me, what I'm really curious about, is what the DA's office asks for. Will they say, this is kind of a political decision, let's ask for probation only, we've won, let's call it a victory? Or will they ask for incarceration? I believe they will asked for an incarceration sentence in this case. The real question is what Justice Merchan will do. Now, there are plenty of arguments to be made for a probation-only sentence. Number one, this is a 71-plus-year-old offender. You have a nonviolent offense, a first-time offender, no guns, no drugs, no violence involved. And I would make an additional argument, and I think reasonable minds could disagree here, that I would say that loss, and the great Chuck Rosenberg will tell you that in fraud cases, especially in the federal system, the single biggest driver of a sentence is the dollar amount of loss. And loss is measured in many different ways. But as a defense attorney, I would argue that the loss in this case is 0.0. It's not a traditional fraud case where you have traditional victims who handed over their money. Let's say, and I'm just thinking of an example, let's say I made up a fake university and charged people fake tuition for my fake university and kept all that money. I'm just giving a hypothetical example. That might be a case where you could measure loss in terms of the number of victims multiplied by how much they paid. You don't really have that here. You could make the argument that the loss and the victims are the people of the state of New York. I get that, and I think reasonable minds could disagree. But as a defense attorney, I would be arguing that loss in this case is zero. So I think that you will see a request for a non-incarceration probation-only sentence. But I also think you're going to see the prosecutors ask for jail time.
Let me open this up to our lawyers, to Chuck, Lisa, and Danny, and just ask what happened. I mean, I must say that I said it, and I've said it here before, that in a nation where 77 million people voted for Donald Trump, I just, maybe I was being cynical, but I just thought there would be one out of 12 jurors that would have said, no, not going to go along with it. We're going to drag this thing out forever. So I was surprised by the quickness of it. I was surprised by the resounding 34 of 34. What do you all think happened in there that moved the dynamic in such a dramatic way against Donald Trump?
Who's first?
Lisa, I'll start with you.
Well, Joe, I think what happened is evidence happened. And the evidence in this case was overwhelming. You know, Todd Blanche can go on as many cable networks as he can find and say that his client was convicted solely on the word of Michael Cohen. And nothing could be further from the truth. His client was convicted largely on the words of two categories of people: his acolytes, starting with David Pecker and ending with Hope Hicks and Madeleine Westerhout, and his own words, heard by the jury in a recording that Michael Cohen made on September 6, 2016, and even including his tweets, which were consciousness of his guilt in 2018, his legal filings where he admitted that this was a reimbursement, and all of the books that he wrote proclaiming how you got to be Donald Trump. Those laid out a framework for his M.O. His M.O. was reward the people who are loyal, loyalty above all else. Don't trust anyone, even if you have the best people around you. Micromanage, 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 because at the end of the day, your checkbook belongs to you and you alone. Donald Trump was convicted because evidence happens.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we may not know for some time until we talk to jurors, but I don't think the jurors spent a lot of time parsing out each and every count. I think they looked at them as a group, and they could have done that because the facts involved with each transaction were so similar. Yes, there were minor differences. I did wonder if they might seize on the fact that Donald Trump signed some checks, but not all the checks. Or, for example, that the checks came from the Trump Organization, then they came from the trust. Those were examples of differences between these transactions. But of course, each count really could have, all these counts could have been divisible by 3 because you had a voucher related to a check, related to an invoice. So in that sense, they could have grouped those together. But unlike many financial crimes cases where the transactions are very distinct and involve very different facts, this could have been a case where they really just could have grouped all of these together and said that Trump's intent applied to all of them broadly based on the evidence they heard of Trump's involvement. And they could have arrived at this relatively quickly. Maybe we'll find out that they took a straw poll right away when they got into the jury room and there was a minority. And going to your question, Joe, you know, you're right. We often speak of it only takes one juror, but practically speaking, if you're that one of 12 and you get in that jury room and you find that, oh, I'm the only one who doesn't agree with my 11 fellow jurors, those folks, I don't think, tend to hold out for too long. I think that just mass psychology is that, well, at least I better listen to what they have to say. I'm convincible. I'm somebody with an open mind. I said I was someone with an open mind. And when you have one or two in the minority like that, I don't think it takes too long. Maybe that's why they read back the testimony to say, hey, Steve, are you convinced now? Maybe your memory is refreshed. Are you with us? And that's probably why this happened. Relatively speaking, in my view, this was a short deliberation.
How involved was Donald Trump in his own defense?
I mean, what do you think? I mean, very involved. And he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. He jokingly said to us a lot, sometimes he wanted to be the litigator. You know, he wanted to be the one that was actually arguing because he's a smart guy and he knows what he's doing. We made every decision together. We did. And there were things that he was frustrated with.
Were you satisfied with jury selection? And was the former president involved in that in any way?
I mean, very much involved. He was right there with the whole team talking about the potential jurors. Look, was I satisfied? We put a motion in because we said we could not get a fair jury in Manhattan. And that's not I'm not being disparaging to the jurors, man. They were great. They showed up on time every day. They were committed. They paid attention. But we're in a situation where we had a very limited number of people we could strike. And most of the folks, overwhelming number of folks, had a very strong opinion of President Trump. And it wasn't positive.
They paid attention.
You know, he talked about, Willie, how Donald Trump was so involved and so engaged in everything, and he wishes he could have been the litigator, and yet he was afraid to take the stand. He wouldn't even get up and talk in his own defense. So I don't know how much he really wanted to talk in there after all.
Yeah, I think that's right. And we'll talk to our legal experts, but there was nothing particularly unusual about jury selection here. They had their chance to strike jurors just like we do all the time. But yeah, Donald Trump didn't want to take the stand. And you do get the sense that Donald Trump, and he had remember all those Republicans who showed up at court for him, including the Speaker of the House of Representatives, to tear down the process in preparation for what happened yesterday, which is to say they knew the evidence was strong, it was overwhelming, perhaps didn't expect to go 34 for 34 on these counts, but they knew there was a likelihood that he would be convicted of something here. Therefore, they had to attack the judge, they had to attack the witnesses, they had to attack the jury in some cases, and attack the process to say that it was rotten and therefore he couldn't get a fair trial. We've outlined all the reasons that's not true. And Joe, we've talked about this, whether or not you believe this should have been brought. This case should have been brought at all. It was. Evidence was produced, was given to the jury. The witnesses came and gave their testimony, and a jury of Donald Trump's peers in New York City, 12 of them from across the spectrum with different views of the world and views of Donald Trump, agreed unanimously, and by the way, relatively quickly, if you look at how long this trial was, that he was guilty on all 34 counts.
Yeah, and you know, Willie, that's the thing. It's such an important point that you just brought up. You could make arguments that this case should not have been brought. The Wall Street Journal editorial page, whoever came up with this line in the editorial this morning should get a bonus. They talked about it, the Turducken legal theory, like, you know, everything like shoved inside and fried. It was, again, and I've said it here time and again, I'm not so sure that any conviction, given the legal theory underlying the case, is going to hold up on appeal. Maybe it will, maybe it won't.
It's going to be a long time of court stuff.
Right, but that's something if Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz or anybody else wanted to go after the DA bringing the case and say, you know, talk about how they disagree, that the legal theory didn't make any sense. That's one thing. But to attack the jurors, to savage the judge, that's just, you know, I think most people would consider that to be un-American. And you saw, and I'm so glad that President Trump's attorney showed respect to the jurors and said they did a great job. They did everything that was asked of them. They showed up early. You know, they were always there on time. They listened. They paid attention. You know, that costs him, that would have cost any Republican senator nothing, and actually would have maybe won a little bit of respect from people that were listening to the message. But instead, they go straight to, we're communist Cuba. And it's a joke.
That was Senator Rubio actually said that yesterday. And one of Donald Trump's adult children said, this verdict officially makes us a third world country. He used another descriptive term. So when the legal system works against you, when a jury of your peers convicts you after hearing the evidence, suddenly we're a third world country. But Donald Trump, either way, now is the first former U.S. president in American history to be convicted of a crime. Late yesterday afternoon, a jury of 12 New Yorkers found Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts against him in the hush money criminal trial. That came after the jury deliberated for roughly 9.5 hours over a couple of days. Sentencing is now set for July 11th, just 4 days before the Republican National Convention begins in Milwaukee. The maximum sentence for falsification of business records is 4 years in prison. But incarceration is not a mandatory sentence. It will be Judge Juan Merchan who ultimately decides the punishment. Jonathan Lemire, Eugene Robinson are still with us for this hour. And let's add to the panel former U.S. Attorney and MSNBC legal analyst Joyce Vance, former acting U.S. Solicitor General and MSNBC legal analyst Neil Katyal, and President and CEO of the National Constitution Center, Jeffrey Rosen. Good morning to you all. Joyce, let me begin with you and your reaction to a verdict of 34 for 34 on these felony counts against the former president.
Yeah, I mean, it's something, Willie. You know, I've talked to a lot of juries after they've reached a verdict. I live in one of those jurisdictions where the judges give you permission to do that several days after a verdict is returned. And what I heard over 25 years was jurors who wanted to express to us how much they honored their oath, that they had tried so hard to set aside any bias or preconception, that they deliberated based only on the evidence and reached their verdict based on the evidence, whatever that verdict was. And that's what this jury did here. They listened to the evidence. They reached a verdict based on the evidence. We saw signs of them working through it. So look, Donald Trump is in the process of trying to spin this verdict now. And Americans need to reject that spin. They need to ignore that. They need to use the same common sense that the jury used here. The jurors are the ones who listened to every bit of the evidence. That's something that we didn't have the opportunity to do. Most of us had to read about it on the cold record or hear reports on the news. The jurors heard every piece of the evidence, and they made a decision here for all of us. I think it's important that we not let Donald Trump, who has done so much damage to our institutions, shake our faith in the jury system, because the jury system did its job here. It listened to the evidence. It returned a verdict. We should accept that verdict.
Neil, I'm curious, sentencing is set for July 11th, and Chuck was talking last hour about the allocution part of that, and that is where the defendant has a chance to express remorse, say something. If a defendant expresses remorse, could that impact the sentence that the judge decides?
I mean, that is the most counterfactual hypothetical I think I've ever gotten. And there's no chance that he's going to express remorse. He's himself has just been going out and attacking the judge, attacking the jury, all of that. But yes, if he expressed remorse, that would be relevant along with his conduct during the trial. But here, do remember, the prosecutor, Steinglass, said here, this is a really serious offense. This is something that may have put Donald Trump directly in the Oval Office. So it's going to be very hard, I think, to get away without jail time. Now, I want to pick up on something you asked Joyce about the jury verdict here, because I think Joyce is absolutely right. But the jury verdict here tells us a lot. I just add to it two things. One is that it's not just a jury verdict in terms of a majority vote or something. In our country, it's got to be a unanimous verdict. All 12 jurors had to agree. And they had to agree under the most difficult standard in the law, the highest burden of proof for the prosecutors, called beyond a reasonable doubt. And the jury did all of that, listened to the evidence, and so concluded. And now you've got all of Trump's allies, including Trump's own lawyer in the clip you played, say, oh, this jury was unfair to Donald Trump. They didn't like him and the like. I mean, there's two problems with that. One is, like, it's just wrong. Like, there was juror number 2, who literally the only media that juror 2 consumes is Truth Social. But that juror was one of 12 jurors who voted to convict Donald Trump. The other is that they're trying to set up an argument about a challenge to venue on appeal, that this was an unfair jurisdiction to try Donald Trump. Every high-profile defendant tries this tack, and it fails. I dealt with it myself when I was special prosecutor in the George Floyd murder. Derek Chauvin made exactly the same argument Trump did. Look at Minneapolis. I can't get a fair trial. I'm demonized and the like. The judge rejected it, and the Court of Appeals rejected it because everywhere in the country there is pretrial publicity. And that's true for Trump just as much, and so the standard for a change of venue won't be met. I think he's got no decent appeal on these grounds.
So, Jeffrey Rosen, let's get your reaction yesterday to what is simply a significant moment in American history. We don't know yet what impact, if any, it will have on this year's election, but this was a day that we will always read about in the history books. Get your sense of the system working, and also beyond that, what you feel the appropriate sentence would be.
The most remarkable aspect of President Trump's reaction to the verdict is that he attacked the entire system as rigged. He attacked the judge as crooked, he attacked the jury, and he attacked the prosecution. And this represents a historic change in American constitutional law. The founders thought that only virtuous leaders would save the republic, and that we'd also needed the auxiliary protections of allegiance to the rule of law when you lost. And Lincoln, right before the Civil War, says that once we abandon our attachment to the rule of law, we're going to succumb to the mob. And it is a sign of third world countries. It's a sign of communist dictatorships that you attack the rule of law as rigged when you lose. That's what happened in Brazil. When the president loses office, he goes to jail, he's pardoned, he runs again, his successor says the system was rigged, and then people storm the Capitol because they won't accept the election. The urgently important thing at this crucial moment in American history, even if you think the prosecution was unfair, even if you think the verdict should be overturned on appeal, is to accept the result of the rule of law. Because in this polarized time, once citizens abandon a commitment to accepting verdicts that they disagree with, then we really will lose the foundations of the constitutional republic. As for the appropriate sentence, that's really a question for New York state law. It is true that if President Trump were to be reelected, then he's unlikely to serve jail time. Even the Supreme Court might say that he has to be able to have his responsibilities and do his duties, and therefore jail time isn't appropriate. But the judge should apply whatever sentence New York law plausibly requires, not treating President Trump differently than any other defendant, in order to reaffirm this really important point. And it's very important that Republicans also accept this and not go the way of attacking the system as rigged, because once we do that, we really have the founders' nightmare.
This is a justice system that hunts Republicans while protecting Democrats. This was certainly a hoax, a sham. This was devastating for the average American watching.
It is shameful to see this, and I hope Americans are paying attention, because America, they think you are stupid.
What we saw today was an absolute travesty of justice. This was not law. This was not criminal justice. This was politics. This was a political smear job. This was an attack job. This is what you see in banana republics. And it is, I am both furious and heartbroken at the same time.
This is the quintessential show trial. This is what you see in communist countries. This is what I grew up having people in this community tell me about. It happened in the days after the Castro Revolution. Obviously, those led to executions. This, on the other hand, is an effort to interfere in an election.
Do they know that it was a jury of 12 peers and that people can see what the evidence was in this case? That was just a sampling of Republican reactions to President Trump's guilty verdict. NBC News also learned RNC political director James Blair had a call with all 50 GOP state chairs after the verdict to issue post-verdict talking points and messaging for the party. Those talking points include, "This is unjust. The conviction will be good for Republicans. We will win the appeal. And we just elected the next president of the United States." Joining us now, author and NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss and former MSNBC host and contributor to Washington Monthly, Chris Matthews. Michael, these Republicans just in history, is there any prediction of how history will look at the reaction to this moment?
What I just heard makes me sick, because the essence of America is to believe in our system of government and our rule of law. When George H.W. Bush was president, he would go over and talk to Mikhail Gorbachev about how to reform his country. And he would say, "Mikhail, no one is going to invest in Russia unless you have a rule of law, because people will wonder whether their money will be there the next day or whether it will be stolen." So to hear Donald Trump and all these people saying that the system is rigged, look at it this way. Let's have a little reality check. So he wants to be president again. And let's say he gets elected. And then he has to take an oath of office, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. That's the rule of law. Well, how do you do that if you've said that in your own case it was a rigged system, bad jury, bad judge, disregard the outcome? It used to be the Republicans were actually for law and order. And the other thing is, you were asking about something in history, Mika. Look at 1974. This is the only time on this program I will ever praise Richard Nixon in Watergate. Supreme Court unanimously 8-0 said, give up your tapes. Nixon didn't say system is rigged, I shouldn't give them up, because he knew that was going to get him kicked out of office. He gave up the tapes. He had to resign. And Gerald Ford, the new president, didn't say system was rigged, Nixon was railroaded. Right. He said our system works. This is a government of laws and not of men. Here, the people rule.
Well, what's interesting, Chris Matthews, and I'd love for you to take me to Pennsylvania, to Lancaster County, or to areas that more wholly voted for Trump, because what they're hearing on Fox News or in the areas where they get their information, far-right networks and news sites, is that not just this is unjust and this was rigged, but they're also hearing that when Donald Trump, if and when Donald Trump is elected, they say when, that Donald Trump will go after everybody who prosecuted him, every single person, retribution. So tell me, how do you feel the people, especially in areas in Pennsylvania, are going to be digesting this information?
Well, including the 58th Ward in Northeast Philadelphia. The parts of Northeast Philadelphia voted for Trump last time. And South Philly, too.
Yeah.
I think this is a focus group, a political focus group. You know, in politics, Joe knows this, you know this. You get a dozen people, you set them aside from the rest of the country, you fill them with all the facts, you give them all the information that's relevant to the discussion, and then they give you a verdict about what they think about the candidates. This was a focus group. Aside from the legal factors, it was a focus group of people who got for 21 days all the facts, unmitigated truth of what was going on in this matter, in this case. And they came out with a judgment in a matter of 9 or 10 hours. And so it's really important that a country where 3/5 of the country don't get the news, they don't get the Philadelphia Inquirer, they don't read the Washington Post, the New York Times, the other big papers, they don't get the news. They say things like, well, I didn't hear, TikTok didn't really cover the trial. What? Or I hear that Joe Biden couldn't recite the alphabet. What? This never happened. This stuff never happens to most people. This time, we had a focus group, had all the facts, all the equal facts, by the way. They all got the same information, and they rendered an actual verdict in a matter of 9 hours. So I think we know where we're at. Where we're at is, if you get all the information to the people, which is almost impossible to do in the media today, you're going to get a verdict. The bad news is, 3/5 of the country's not getting the news. They're listening to TikTok, or they're listening to nothing or nonsense or social media or what Trump's been putting out on Fox. And that's the problem. But this case is a good case because it's people that had all the facts for 21 days. And by the way, your lawyers on your show have been fabulous. By the way, they've all been Joyce. Everybody's been fabulous. And they understand this matter was a truthful response from a truthful group of people doing their job as jurors, and they learned the truth and they acted on it. That's really powerful information. Apart from the legal system, it's about an American focus group.
And this is the way it works, Michael Beschloss. We've been saying all morning that this, yes, it's New York City, and Donald Trump came out and said, I only got 5% in Manhattan. How can I get a fair trial here? But if you actually look at the makeup of the jury, if you look at the makeup of the jury, which Donald Trump and his legal team had a say in selecting the jurors, because that's how the system works. They struck jurors, they chose jurors. As many of the jurors, those 12 you're seeing there, got their news from Truth Social as MSNBC, one each. Also, a lot of them, you know, Fox News, Wall Street Journal. The point being, they consume news from a wide spectrum. They come from different backgrounds. Some of them perhaps had some affection for Donald Trump. So they listened, as Chris said, to the evidence and made a decision unanimously within our system that he was guilty on all 34 counts. And I'm curious, from your point of view of history, of the way that our system sort of in the last 5-6 years has bent but not broken. We talked about all those trials around the 2020 election of January 6th. That, yes, the system was pushed. The system was tested by Donald Trump, a man who is still here. And I think it's safe to say that the test will continue for the next several months.
Yeah, totally agree. And if he is elected, it could continue for the rest of our lifetimes, conceivably. That's what's at stake. And I think this is the question we've all got to ask. You know, do we believe in the system of law that we've got in this country, which to my mind is the essence of America, or do we not? And how do you expect a president and whoever he appoints as attorney general, you know, let's say that there are riots in the cities in October, which some Republicans have said would be helpful to them. Is Donald Trump going to say, you know, the police are just as bad as the Capitol Police were, he says, on January 6th? and he's going to pardon the January 6th prisoners, as he calls them. These were people who, were very near to assassinating the vice president and capturing the Speaker of the House. Is this who you want providing law and order in this country? So what I'm saying is that, what cuts through that? You and Chris are quite rightly talking about if someone lives in a pro-Trump news bubble that says that all this is silliness and Trump is the only one who's been offended against. He's a victim here. What cuts through that? Well, 2 words: convicted felon. Someone who has been convicted of violating the law 34 times, and even more than that, does not give too much promise of fulfilling the oath that he has to take as president to protect our Constitution and our system of law. If you're a conservative and you believe in our system and you want the government to protect you and your family and your business and your community, how is it helpful to have a president of the United States saying that the system that does that is rigged and should be disregarded?
Joining us now for the Biden campaign's first live interview since the announcement of the conviction is national co-chair for President Biden's reelection campaign, Mitch Landrieu. Mitch, thank you so much for being with us this morning. We appreciate it. Well, let's just start right there.
Good morning.
What is the reaction? What is your reaction to what we heard yesterday, a historic moment, the first conviction ever of a former president of the United States?
Well, I think that it's a very sober moment for the country and a very sad moment for the country, for all of the people in America to have a president or an ex-president become a convicted felon. That's nothing for anybody to have a lot of joy about. But yesterday, you saw democracy work. One of the fundamental tenets of democracy is that everybody in the United States is subject to the rule of law, that you come before a judge and a jury of your peers, facts and evidence are held, and then a verdict is rendered. That is what a nation that relies on laws not of men is supposed to do. And as a consequence of that trial, Donald Trump is now a convicted felon. But that does not change the fact that the only thing that can stop him from getting to the White House is the American people. They will be the final jury as it relates to who is the president of the United States. And the choice is really, really clear. You can have a guy that's a convicted felon that has been found liable of defamation, sexual abuse, and business fraud, and now a convicted felon who thinks about himself, and of course, every word that comes out of his mouth thinks about revenge against people who dare cross him. Or you can have Joe Biden, who wakes up every day thinking about the American people, delivering, making sure that our democracies are protected, our freedoms are protected, and that he makes life better for all Americans. That's the choice before the American people. And nothing that happened yesterday is going to change that fact that we have an election about who America is going to be for years to come in a couple of months.
So you just framed the national significance of yesterday and the choice ahead. But tell us, how will the Biden campaign use this verdict? How will you incorporate it into your messaging, and what will the president himself say?
Well, I don't want to get ahead of the president. I don't have any news to make on when he'll speak or what he'll say. He'll address it in time. But it is a fact now, an uncomfortable fact for all of us in America, that Donald Trump is a convicted felon. And the reason it's important to the campaign is this: to be the president of the United States, wisdom, character, and judgment are really important. And if you weigh that against Donald Trump's life, in his personal life, in his business life, in his political life, everything that he touches has turned to dirt. He has used the power of the presidency to hurt people, not to help people. Joe Biden, on the other hand, wakes up every day making sure that we're creating jobs, that we have low unemployment rate, that we're putting people back to work, thinking about restoring democracy to people. But democracy is on the ballot, make no mistake about it. And the fact that Donald Trump and all of his acolytes are now going to attack the rule of law, they are attacking the very foundation of what makes America great. So if everybody wants to stop that, you got to go to the polls. Sign up at joebiden.com. Come work with us, save democracy, and make America a better place for everybody. That's what Joe Biden wants to do.
As you just suggested, the former president and a number of Republicans, including just a short time ago, the Speaker of the House, members of the Senate, have said that, have compared to what happened yesterday to what would happen in a communist nation, saying that the American justice system failed here. Let's get your reaction to that. Do you have concerns as to how the former president and these Republicans may incite his supporters after what happened?
Well, I think that we're at a very delicate moment. Joe Biden has talked to this 7 times. He's given a speech about how fragile democracy can be, but yet how strong it can be if people just show up and vote. There is a very strong and clear antidote to anything that the speaker might be saying or the president, the ex-president might be saying, all of which are wrong, by the way. You have to go to the polls and vote. That's how, in a democracy, you stop autocracies from happening. So go to JoeBiden.com. That is the only way to keep him out of the Oval Office. And there's nothing that happened yesterday that's going to relieve that burden or take that responsibility away from the American people. But to be clear, Speaker Johnson always says, he's from Louisiana, he's actually no Mike and I like him, that he's a constitutional lawyer. The Constitution of the United States says that we are a nation of laws, not of men. It allows for trial by jury, which is one of the most sacrosanct things in a democracy. It also calls for the peaceful transition of power. And as a result of yesterday, we now know that Donald Trump tried to stop the election from being held in a free and fair way. And then after it was held, he tried to stop the peaceful transition of power. You can't have 2 more graver assaults on democracy, and democracy cannot have a greater defender than Joe Biden. So this choice is really, really clear. You can have somebody that cares about himself, his billionaire friends, and seeks retribution and hate and wants to destroy this country, or you can pick somebody that wakes up every day fighting for the American people, who is going to save democracy if the American people give him a chance.
National co-chair for President Joe Biden's reelection campaign, Mitch Landrieu, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Bringing to the conversation the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. Congressman, thanks for being with us this morning. You have some experience in holding Donald Trump accountable as the lead impeachment manager when he was in the days after January 6th. What is your reaction to this sweeping verdict yesterday of 34 counts and 34 verdicts of guilty?
Well, my initial reaction was thank God for the jury system. When we went over to the Senate, having impeached Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection against the Union, there was a 232 to 197 vote in the House. And we were over in the Senate for a week presenting our case. And I think the evidence was absolutely overwhelming. And the defense, as in the New York case, was pretty non-existent. I mean, they did not have a coherent counter-narrative to tell. And yet we were only able to get 57 out of 100 votes, 57 to 43, which is a pretty commanding majority, but we needed 2/3. And I just feel like the jury system is an essential democratic practice and institution because it's a microcosm of the people. And what you get is common sense. People who are willing to take in all of the facts on all of the sides, people who are willing to participate in this justice system that includes the presumption of innocence, that includes the right of the defendant either to testify or not testify, as Donald Trump chose to do. And we're willing to apply the law to the facts. And so, to me, it was a beautiful thing to watch. Obviously, the process is not completely played out. The convicted defendant, in this case, Donald Trump, has the right to appeal. And we should all respect the appeals process like we're respecting the trial process. But I think it was a great victory for the justice system within liberal democracy.
Yeah, that cross-section of Donald Trump's peers in New York City sat and listened for several weeks to evidence and testimony and decided, yeah, he did it. All of it. Congressman, I know you're not surprised, like we're not surprised by the response from your congressional colleagues on the Republican side. But I'm curious for your reaction and your response to how extreme it's been. You've had prominent United States senators saying we are now a banana republic. Senator Marco Rubio saying this reminds him of the stories his family would tell him about Cuba, where there is no rule of law. The extremism that we're hearing, even from the Speaker of the House this morning on television, saying the Supreme Court needs to step in and reverse this miscarriage of justice. What's your response to all of that?
Well, Donald Trump has been like a psychological and cognitive stress test for the Republican Party. And so many of them have failed. Not all of them, not Liz Cheney, not Mitt Romney. There are a lot of them who have said, no, they don't want to go down the road of becoming members of a cult of authoritarian personality. But at this point, many of them are perfectly willing to surrender critical thinking skills and everything they know about the legal system and everything they know about political science and simply give themselves over to the cult of Trump. I mean, imagine if Trump woke up and decided, all right, the game is over. I'm going to admit all of these crimes, all of these offenses against the Constitution. What would they do at that point? Would they still be yelling, no, no, let's stick with Trump. Let's keep going down the road to authoritarianism. But it shows that they are really acting like members of a religious cult who are sleeping on the basement floor someplace, just listening to the tapes of the cult leader.
So, Congressman, on the issue of the Supreme Court, we know that Chief Justice Roberts has decided to not meet with Democrats about the behavior of Justice Alito and Thomas. But you have a piece that you wrote for the New York Times this week saying there's a way to force those two justices to recuse themselves from January 6 cases. Can you explain that to us?
Well, it's called the writ of mandamus. And that was the writ that was used in Marbury versus Madison. And it's a writ where the Supreme Court, in a case where it has jurisdiction, can tell a federal official, here I argue including a Supreme Court justice, to perform a ministerial act. And the act in this case is the act of judicial recusal, which is compelled, I think, by the Supreme Court's own precedents in the field. And so I canvass some of the different cases where the court decided that there needed to be recusal because there was an objective reality of questions about the impartiality of the judge. And so what the Supreme Court has said in these cases is that what matters is not whether the justice or the judge thinks for himself that he or she can be impartial. The question is, what is the reasonable appearance to the rest of the world? And, you know, I close out by talking about Chief Justice Roberts' analogy he advanced during his confirmation hearings about a judge being like an umpire. Well, imagine an umpire in the World Series of Baseball who was flying the flag or the pennant of one of the teams competing. Would anybody think that that umpire could actually be a neutral, impartial, objective officiant in the game? I don't think so. What if the umpire's wife was trying to overturn the score in the last game, which was the official final score, and was trying to say, let's keep going, let's make this happen? Would anyone think that an umpire in that situation could proceed? And I've been hearing from people in the baseball field and people who are umpires saying none of these people would ever be allowed to officiate in a game. And yet these Supreme Court justices have been allowed essentially to be a judge in their own case and to proceed.
All right, ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you very much. And Doug